Big Game Preview. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former UGA great John Stinchcomb, who has been great tonight to hang out with and talking with all these Georgia fans who have come out here to get ready for the big one on Saturday against Kentucky and anything that might be coming up after that, and making the proceedings here more interesting. Here at the Marlows in Brookhaven, just to my left, and then on down the row here on the patio. By the way, what a nice night it is on this this fall Tuesday. But we just got a chance a moment ago, John, to see the college football playoff top 25 come out. That has certainly gotten folks stirred up here. First of all, thanks for being with us here tonight. It's great to have you a part of this. And what do you make of the excitement of Georgia fans here heading towards another big weekend, this time with the SEC East on the line?
Well, I'm glad to have been here this week and not last week. I'm sure you had a lot of question marks remaining after that LSU game. Now you get to come off the heels of a big win against a top 10 team at the time in Florida and facing another top 10 team apparently in Kentucky. So how many times have you ever said that?
Yeah,
top
exactly right.
Kentucky?
One of the guys, John, that was here earlier was talking about how, you know, when you have the Georgia-Kentucky game on Saturday for the SEC East, Alabama-LSU on Saturday, which could be the SEC West. That's one of those deals where it's almost like an SEC football Final Four. And John, one of the guys that came out to hang out with us here at the Marlows in Brookhaven, said it may be Georgia's first chance to actually beat Kentucky in a Final Four, which I thought was a pretty good line. And as you pointed out a moment ago, when the college football playoff top 25 was just announced, Kentucky was listed as the number 9 team. So you're right. It is a top 10 matchup. You know, apart from the fact that it's an unusual entrance into that top 10, the fact that for Georgia it's another high-profile game, the kind of thing that if Georgia wins it, not only does it give Georgia the cachet of winning the SEC East or owning the East, as we say around Dog Nation, but it's also that resume builder. Georgia can point to a top 10 win, which in a close comparison with Michigan, who's ranked just ahead of Georgia, a team like Oklahoma is ranked just behind Georgia. In a comparison like that, who you've beaten is going to matter, and Kentucky's going to, if Georgia can get that win, it's going to count as a quality win here.
Well, it'll definitely count as a quality win. At the end of the day, I don't think it really matters. I think you have to go undefeated the rest of the way. I don't think they're going to let a 2-loss team into the top 4 college football playoff system by the end of the season. So you look at the top of the board. The good news is you're in the conversation. You're one of the 6 teams, the 10 teams that have a legit shot of making the playoffs. And for almost every team up there, they control their own destiny. You win the right ball games, you win the rest of the ball games, and you've punched your ticket into the playoffs. That's
exactly right. That's John Stinchcomb. I'm Brandon Adams. It's great to be here as a part of our Dog Nation Big Game Preview, live at the Marlows in Brookhaven. By the way, if you want to know about the great Marlows events coming up at the Marlows closest to you in your neighborhood, please text the word Marlows. That's MARLOWS. MARLOWS to 24242, and you can become a Marlows Insider, find out about special offers, find out about tremendous events. It's all there for you when you become a Marlows Insider by texting the word Marlows to 24242 today. All right, I want to take a lot of comments. We can react to what happened with the college football playoff selection committee, with their rankings come out. As we may have mentioned, if I haven't mentioned this, I guess I probably should have, Georgia does come in at number 6, Michigan at number 5. It was Oklahoma at number 7. Ahead of Georgia after that, you had Notre Dame at 4. A little bit of an uproar here in the room at the Marlows in Brookhaven when LSU landed at number 3. Then it was Clemson at 2, Alabama at 1. Before we get into what has recently happened for Georgia against Florida, I guess let me give you a chance to weigh in on this. Will you have any surprise whatsoever about LSU, which has a loss, being ahead of Notre Dame, which doesn't, given the fact that Notre Dame right now probably has the best win of any team in the country? Now, that'll change after Alabama and LSU play on Saturday for one of those 2 teams. But Notre Dame beat Michigan, and yet they're ranked behind a 1-loss LSU. Are you surprised by that at all?
I am. I think it shows the level of respect that the committee has for the SEC West and the season that they have to play. It sets up this weekend to be a huge weekend of football. Obviously, the what do you say, the top four, the final four in the SEC this weekend. But it's not going to matter. Come this time next week, we'll have plenty of answers, and it goes down to the Alabama-LSU game.
Daniel Taylor and Terry Locklear on Facebook also pointing out it's a chance for Georgia to beat the number 9 team in the country again after doing that last week against Florida. And with that in mind, I guess let's start with that, if you don't mind, before we get too deep in the comment section with a lot of folks reacting to the top 25 that just came out. Your overall thoughts from Florida. You alluded to this a moment ago, and I think you're spot on. We did a Marlowe's event last week. We were at the Dunwoody location. Had a great time there. But part of that night was partially about calming some fears, partially about addressing what we thought were going to be big issues going into the game against Florida. There was a little bit of restlessness on the part of Dog Nation a week ago. A 19-point win against Florida doesn't correct all of that, but for large measure it has quieted that, at least for now. What did you make of what you saw from the Dogs against Florida?
Well, for me, coming out of the LSU game, the questions resided on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, much has been made about replacing Roquan and the defensive front, and the box is different. You got a true freshman starting at cornerback, but that wasn't my concern at the end of LSU. To me, it was all these high-profile playmakers on offense. Where were they? Where were they against LSU? You've got these great wide receivers that are huge and can run, and D-Rob can't even make it on the field because we have so many guys in front of him, and they seem to, I don't know if disappear is the right word, but in the second half of LSU, you had to leave with more questions about the offense of, are we really high profile? Are we really able to press and create plays? You go into Florida, the defense is creating turnovers left and right. So they definitely put their stamp on that game. And offensively, you come away with 36 points and got back to your true identity, which is ground and pound first and foremost.
Well, along those lines, let me bring you in then on a conversation a lot of folks have had on broadcasts like this one here around Dog Nation, which is that when you're playing early games in the season against big underdogs, you can overwhelm them with your total number of players. Send in a bunch of wide receivers, send in a bunch of running backs, and just wear your opponent down. But against good teams like LSU, which Georgia didn't do, a good team like Florida, which Georgia probably did do, it's time now to shorten your bench and say, we've got 5 running backs that can play, I guess 4 with Zamir White injured. We've got 4 who can play, but we're going to primarily give the ball to this guy and that guy. Wide receivers, we've got a dozen guys who might be able to play, but primarily we're going to focus on this guy, maybe that guy. I mean, do you agree with what others have said in our comment section, even right now, that in a really tough situation on the road at Kentucky, another example of this maybe on Saturday, it's actually time to shorten the bench, and instead of trying to spread the wealth out amongst a lot of people, it's time to figure out the 4 or 5 guys between running backs and wide receivers who you can really depend upon in a big spot?
I think you have to have that. I think you definitely have role players, situational guys where you like a couple setup plays to bring them in, and you're going to highlight them in different ways. But you look at last season, you had Javon Wims, who from week 1 to by the end of the year, you knew what you had. You could count on him week in and week out to make those tough catches, those contested passes down the sideline where he's going to rip the ball away and come down with it, and you get your first down, you get your touchdowns. Up to this point, there hasn't been 2 guys, 3 guys that really put their stamp on it that said, we're the primary receivers. Now, Holloman, after this past week,
I think he's one of those guys now. I do. I really do.
He staked his claim, didn't he? I do. But up to this point, it's been that committee approach, and it hasn't been, these are our main focal players, and then we're going to accentuate the strengths of a couple of individuals after that.
Let me read Diedrich Frazier's comment here on YouTube because you mentioned this a moment ago. Diedrich says, run first, then pass. That's the identity of our team. I would say that with Diedrich, that's what it's supposed to be. After the LSU game, I think one of the frustrating things was that Dave Aranda, who is a very good defensive coordinator for the Tigers, I think that he'll cause some trouble for Tua Tagovailoa even maybe on Saturday. But he showed some looks to the Georgia offense that I don't want to say tricked, but certainly coerced Georgia into passing instead of running. And it's almost like the chess match was lost before the ball was even snapped. It was a demoralizing thing for some Georgia fans. It sounds like, though, you agree with Diedrich that you got to throw the ball, but it's a run-first deal that sets up the pass and not the other way around.
Well, that's the identity of this offense. You recruit that way. You train that way as to the style of football you want to play. And offensively, you've got huge men up front. I mean, across the board, we talked about it earlier. It's one of the biggest offensive lines in college football and probably in the NFL. It's just across the board. Well, that's designed so that you can pound on folks. And what LSU did is they load the box. They changed up their scheme a little bit towards the second half and challenged Georgia to do something that goes a little bit against their identity of, we're going to say, if you're going to run the ball, you're going to go into some very difficult looks. And most teams don't want to do that. It's hard to run against an 8-man box when you only have 7 blocking. I mean, you're going to have a free guy.
That's right.
So what do? You want to throw into a defense like that to get them out of that single high, strong safeties rotating down type defenses that are challenging you to throw the ball. Now, what was difficult for Georgia is they weren't able to answer that very well.
Yeah.
They didn't get them out of those defenses by catching LSU in bad spots when they're playing press man and single high and challenging our receivers to come up with plays to get them out of those defenses, and it allowed LSU to continue to play to their favor. Now, with that said, it's also a scoring thing. So Georgia's set up to where if you're behind, of course, as an offense, you're going to have to score more. So you're not going to stick with first, second, third down run, and every once in a while we're going to mix in passes. So, in hindsight, you look back and there were some decisions early on where Georgia starts off with a 14-point deficit, and they're playing catch-up all game and not something, a position that any team wants to be in. And offensively, they're not designed to be in that.
Boy, I tell you, it's a lot of fun tonight to have John Stinchcomb, the former Georgia great, here on hand with us at the Marlows in Brookhaven. He's been so well received by the audience on hand here. It's a great time to have him here on this Marlows big game preview as we look ahead to the game against Kentucky on Saturday. I'll also invite you that if you've not become a Marlows insider, to make sure you become one. Text the word Marlows, M-A-R-L-O-W-S, to 24242, and you can find out about special offers and big-time events taking place in the Marlows close to you. When we talk about Marlows, one of the things we talk about a lot is chef-inspired food, and one of the things I love is that the Marlows in your neighborhood is going to be, cooking up a very special menu just for you. We've had specials here tonight available here at this location that aren't available at the Marlows that might be closest to you. So either, check out the one that's closest to you by becoming a Marlows insider. You can find out a whole lot more about that. We also want to talk about the Kentucky game coming up. Let me reset the news, though, as it has just unfolded here before we get to that. College Football Playoff Top 25 just comes out a moment ago. Let me see if I can do the top 10 from memory here. Georgia does come in at 6 in the top 10 for the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. It's ahead of Oklahoma at 7. It is behind Michigan at 5. Notre Dame, a somewhat surprising entrance at number 4 here. Undefeated, but ranked below LSU with a loss at number 3. It's Clemson at number 2. It's Alabama number 1. After Oklahoma, it was Washington State in the 8th spot. Gardner Minshew, by the way, the transfer quarterback from East Carolina, has had an amazing year there on the Palouse. At number 9, you've got Kentucky, Georgia's opponent on Saturday. And number 10, I don't remember. I don't come close to remembering number 10, but I got the first 9. That's probably close enough.
Ohio State?
It was Ohio State at number 10. John, I knew there was a reason why you had you here tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
All that said, the number 9 team in that ranking is the team that Georgia's going to play on Saturday. And you touched on this. So many people here on hand at Marlows and Brookhaven have touched on this. It is just a little bit unusual to see a Kentucky team rated so high. So I ask you, and I don't ask this question flippantly, I legitimately wonder, is Kentucky truly for real?
I think they're a good team. I think they're much improved over where they've been in the past. They got whipped for 59.5 minutes this past Saturday, and a post 60-minute play, an added time, they come away with a touchdown and a 1-point win against a struggling Missouri team.
Yeah.
So, that play goes another direction. They get a tip. Whatever it works out, they're nowhere close to number 9. So they're a good team. They're obviously have played to their talent level, if not above what you'd expect from them. Do I think they're the number 9 team in the country? No.
Not likely to finish that way, right?
I don't see that happening. Now, they come in and give Georgia a run for their money this Saturday, and we'll have a different discussion next week. But I think they're a little out of their depth at this point.
The one thing I have come to believe about Kentucky, though, especially when you dive and look at the overall stats about this is a good defense. And the one thing that Kirby Smart was adamant about when he spoke to reporters on Monday is this can be the byproduct when you have so many seniors. In 2002, your offensive line was like the same way. We're going to talk about your SEC championship season in 2002 before we're done, but you guys had a lot of veteran players in an offensive line in 2002, and there's just something about guys who've been through the rigor, who've been through the wars there in the SEC. They're just better for it. And for Kentucky, when it's guys like Cash Daniel and Allen, the other big pass rusher, when you've got these guys who've been around for a while, the experience matters and it counts. And statistically, the Wildcats have put together some really good defense this year. And if you listen to Kirby, it sounds like he thinks the experience is a big reason why.
I agree with him. I think you start to learn how your strengths, your weaknesses, how you can complement each other. Plus, you've seen almost everything an SEC team's going to throw at you.
Yeah.
So there's a way you start to play things. It doesn't mean you're more talented than some of the younger guys, but you've seen these reps. And as soon as that guard pulls, you close. Whatever it is, you know how to play off each other and you know where to be. And once you've seen these reps time and time again, it makes you a better defense than probably what you would look like on paper. And when you have seniors that have played together, they build that synergy that's created when you've been together for a while. And yeah, you look at their wins, it's mainly because of their defense. I mean, against Missouri, Snell was pretty much eliminated from the game, and they had to rely on that defense keeping their offense in it.
Corey Chance in our Facebook comment section on the subject of Benny Snell, though, points out that Georgia has had some issues stopping the run this year, and he says Georgia is clearly going to have its hands full battling against Benny Snell. Hard to deny that when you see the numbers that Snell has put up in some games this season. As you touched on, he hasn't been perfect in every game. He's been bottled up at times, but he's also capable of explosiveness, and Georgia's been vulnerable there. That's a challenge for the Georgia rush defense, right?
Absolutely. You got to keep him contained. He's a big play, big strike running back that if you let him get loose, he can have a day. You know, he's one of those guys that once you builds momentum, once he's able to find those lanes, it seems like every play he finds those lanes. But the games where they're able to keep him in check, I mean, he can also disappear a little bit.
Yeah, and I like Shelton Tucker's comment along those lines in our Facebook comment section. Shelton says that he thinks that Snell's only going to get 45 yards on Saturday. Well, let me ask you that, though. Even if it's not 45, even if it's a number similar to that, is there something to be said because Snell is a little bit of a talker, not in a bad way necessarily. He's just kind of a vocal guy. For a Georgia rush defense that needs some confidence, could it be this game the way that Shelton Tucker suggests here, where that group does get their confidence back because they stop a running back that by now every fan of the SEC for the most part has heard of? Even though Snell's been held in check a couple times this year, if Georgia does that on Saturday for a group that's been maligned a little bit, they do get some confidence back, right?
I think you have to build momentum at this point in the season where you want to have confidence going in each week. If you're talking about the national scene, if you're number 6 and you're playing each week to get in the CFP, well, yeah, you have to build momentum. And this defense is most of the question marks have been against the run games of your opponent. So if you're able to shut down one of the SEC elite and Benny Snell, that would absolutely build momentum. Now, from a microcosm, that 1 week perspective, it's about winning the game.
Yeah.
And you have to eliminate all the options. I get it, but
completely.
It could really be a feather in the cap of this defense.
David West had a very interesting comment in the Facebook comment section as well about the issue of over pursuing. We saw some of that on Saturday, right? And I know that's a much easier thing for someone like me to say stop doing than it is to actually, execute when you're on the field. I get the difference there. But for a lot of Georgia fans, they did notice that versus Florida. There were opportunities at tackles. In some cases, there were opportunities at tackles in the backfield, but an over-pursuit situation led to a missed tackle. What do you do to clean that up?
Practice reps is exactly what they're doing over in Athens.
I bet they're getting reps this week on that. Woo, boy, I bet they're getting reps on that
fundamentals.
This week.
It's the same thing you did in rec ball or high school. You have a week where you miss a couple tackles. What are you going to do all week long? Tackle drills, fundamentals, breaking down. And, there's so many dynamic playmakers on a Saturday that you get them in space, and it's pretty hazardous for those defenders. But you go back to the basics of getting the fundamentals square and you miss a lot less tackles than you would otherwise.
Santiago Diarn, heading towards the Kentucky game on Saturday, has an interesting question as well on Facebook. He says, do you think a leader's about to step up for Georgia? And the one thing I will say, John, is I've been very interested in hearing Kirby on this subject over the course of the season. You know, at different points, he's given almost the same answer, that leadership is determined once adversity strikes. You can't be a leader in a front-running situation when in September Georgia's beating everybody by 40 points. No real leadership, at least according to Kirby, no real leadership emerges then. It's only after something bad has happened do you find out who really is going to step up their, you know, either their vocal presence or fully commit to, you know, what's going on and what needs to happen to the program. Well, Georgia got some adversity a couple weeks ago. It lost LSU. A lot of this stuff happens behind closed doors, but if you had to guess, what do you think it's been like going towards the Florida game and now going back on the road again for Kentucky? Santiago says, are there leaders stepping up right now? You've been one of those leaders in the past. How do you think that plays out?
Well, I think it's speculative at this point, if not knowing what that locker room looks like, but you have to acknowledge the fact that there is a leadership void. You lose so many guys that had bought into the system and shown their commitment by returning for their senior year. When you look at Sony and Nick and Roquan and Lorenzo, all those guys had an opportunity to bail and jet before the 2017 season. They come back and it's automatic buy-in, and that position of leadership is pretty obvious and evident that they get that. When you have that void, it's going to take time for people to identify and sift themselves out from the herd. And that adversity from a game like LSU 2 weeks ago, it will definitely help clarify the waters.
Can I change the subject here for 2 seconds? Because I told this to our audience live here at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven earlier that I believe, and we've done a lot of Marlowe's broadcasts, I think this is the first one we've done where the playoff rankings have come out at the same time. Typically, these are on different nights. It's actually kind of cool to be here in this moment. And so if you don't mind, I want to take a couple comments on these rankings as well. I thought that Tram Dickerson had an interesting line. This is on YouTube. Tram says he thinks the committee may be some chicanery trying to set up a number 1 versus number 3 this weekend. That's why they put LSU at number 3. John, I will tell you that when it comes to the playoff selection committee, I am very prone to conspiracy theories. I'm not so sure that Tram's all that far off base on this, that, you know, LSU's a good team, but there's something that looks awful good from a college football business perspective to have, even if it's not on ESPN on Saturday, by the way, to have number 1 versus number 3. The loser's going to drop anyway. I wouldn't put it past the committee to love the idea of matching up 2 of its top 4 teams, top 3 teams, you know, just a week after these rankings come out.
Does it matter? It doesn't at this point, where if you're 3, if you're 4, it doesn't really matter. So if it does help push the product, yeah, I can see that happening.
Well, here's where it, though, could, I think, be kind of interesting and matter in that, you know, last year we saw Alabama lose its division but still go to the college football playoff. I don't know what the appetite is going to be like for that if it were to occur in the same way again this year. Whereas Alabama, currently ranked number 1, if they lose to LSU on Saturday and if LSU wins out, which they'd be certainly favored to do, at that point in time, it's, you know, it's your opinion of Alabama and their ranking right now, and your opinion of LSU, the team that beat Alabama, and its ranking at this point in time that will factor into this. This is one of those things that sort of doesn't matter until it does.
Right.
It seems likely that chalk will play out, and Alabama's going to be a very good West Division winner. Georgia's, you know, likely to be a very good East Division winner. We've also seen strange things happen in college football as well, and I think one of the things you see is there are a lot of fans, even if it's not particularly an Alabama fan or an LSU fan, they got their swords out and they're ready to go once this really hot debate kicks in here about who those 4 teams belong. Because one more point I'll add to this is what makes this year's rankings different than most, we haven't had Notre Dame, which, by the way, is not in a conference. We haven't had them competing for the top 4 spots before. So there are 5 conferences, there are 4 playoff spots. There's always going to be a conference that's the odd man out. With Notre Dame, now you have at least 2 conference champions, assuming Notre Dame keeps winning, but at least 2 conference champions who will be the odd man out. So I think that does add to the angst maybe a little bit on the part of some fans.
I get it. I mean, as a conspiracy theorist, possibly yourself, it makes sense. I'm not a big proponent of just looking at conferences as a whole anyway. I think each team has to stand on their own merit. And I think you've got a good argument as to why you'd put LSU number 3. We've discussed it right here. You're coming off a pretty big win against the number 6 team in the country. So on that alone, you can rectify the numbers, if you will, as to why you'd put a team at number 3.
Kid in our YouTube comment section, back to Kentucky here for a moment, says that Kentucky better be rested going into Saturday. Obviously, Kentucky's been on a little bit of a wild ride itself, different than Georgia, which played an emotional game against a rival in Florida on Saturday. Kentucky was at Missouri, trailed for most of that game, and came back to win in thrilling fashion. You talked about this before the show started, and I was hoping you might bring some of this on the air. What it's like to have to get back up for a second week in a row if you're Georgia here. For Kentucky, maybe coming back home, knowing they were lucky to escape from Columbia, Missouri with a win last Saturday. What's the emotional component of a game like this in November where teams are banged up, they're tired, and yet now they're playing the most important games they played all season long?
Well, I think for Georgia, for all the guys that were on the roster last year, they've had that experience of playing in a big game, followed by playing in a big game, followed by playing in a big game, and you get that trend of every game's a big game. For Kentucky, that's a little bit different. They haven't had quite that experience in the past. Now, you know, the concern of a trap game, that's all out the window. You're playing against the number 9 team in the country as it's ranked and stands today. Different from those experiences where you've gone into Kentucky before and the stadium feels almost deflated and you're trying to generate your own energy as the visiting team. That's not the atmosphere Georgia's walking into, not to mention the whole SEC East is on the line. So it's not your traditional trap game. It's a highly energized atmosphere that Georgia should be familiar with, of playing big game after big game, and might be a little more foreign territory for Kentucky.
John William Adams in our Facebook comment section had an interesting statement, and I think he agrees a lot with what you were saying a moment ago, which is for Georgia, where it's ranked doesn't matter too much. It just needs to keep winning. And John kind of echoed you by saying that he really feels that Georgia's in a pretty good position here, that it could potentially beat LSU in a rematch if they play in the SEC championship, or maybe beat Alabama too. And here's what I'll say about that. And, you know, the subject of Alabama seemingly comes up every time we're at Marlowe's because, admittedly, this season Alabama has looked very good. The one point I keep making, John, I'd love to hear you weigh in on this if you don't mind. I think it's probably good that Georgia's not playing Alabama tonight. And it's probably good that Georgia wasn't playing them in September and October. But when you are boat racing everybody by 50 points, that's a really difficult level of play to maintain September, October, November, into December. I'm not telling you that Georgia's going to beat Alabama were they to play in December, but I'm also not ruling it out as a possibility as well. Georgia's in the process right now why it's trying to get better. It's trying to get better. Alabama's trying to maintain its same level. I think there is still a lot of football between now and December, and determining who's going to win the SEC championship right now, I think it's still way too early to decide.
I'm with you. I feel like if this game was played in September, you know, hopefully you're earning the right to play later in the year in the SEC championship. But if that game was played in September, Alabama knows who they are. They had a pretty clear identity from day one. Like you say, they're just streamlining each week, and it's not even competitive. Well, that's because they knew who they were, and they've had those pieces in place. For Georgia, there's so many holes in trying to create a new identity. Each season is new. There's still some question marks left. We talked about that earlier with the receivers of, you know, who are those 2 or 3 guys that you know you can count on and then supplement in situational play. You know, Holloman is the guy that we said has kind of one of the few that staked his claim as I'm a guy you can count on. But that very clear identity for this Georgia team is still being determined, and we're pretty late in the season where there's pieces that are still falling into place. And like you said, on defense, how is it that you're going to build that momentum as a run-defending defense, and what are those pieces, and how are you deploying the defensive line to stop teams? But Alabama hasn't really had those questions.
Yeah.
They've had that identity from day one and just continue to build on that.
That is John Stinchcomb. He's a great former Georgia offensive lineman, also a terrific voice breaking down everything happening in college football. It's fun to have him here as part of our Marlowe's Big Game Preview, looking at Kentucky on Saturday, live here from the Marlowe's in Brookhaven. And if you haven't become a Marlowe's insider yet, we'd love for you to do that by texting the word Marlowe's, Marlows, to 242. The word Marlows, M-A-R-L-O-W-S, no apostrophe, 24242, and you can become a Marlows Insider. All right, before we wrap up, you know, we had you on Dog Nation Daily this morning, which was a great thrill for me, and one of the things that came up was what Georgia's going to try to do on Saturday for now the second year in a row. You were actually a part of the very first one of those. You won the division in 2002 and then went on to win the SEC championship in that same season. You know, last year there was a big breakthrough for Georgia, getting the college football playoff the first time. Seeing Georgia in the Rose Bowl a year ago, it's a little bit different scenario than your year, but did it bring back those memories for you of how good it feels to bring a championship, an SEC championship, to a real starving fan base?
Absolutely. I mean, the Dog Nation is the best fan base in college football, in my opinion. They're very passionate, and each year, even if there was question marks, we're talking about playing for national championships. The only thing that's changed is that I think we've got the roster to be able to legitimately have that discussion year in and year out. And what we changed in 2002 was we raised the bar a little bit to, you know, we hadn't won an SEC championship in 20 years. Well, that became very feasible and very possible for our team, having done it in 2002. So then that kind of becomes the expectation. What Georgia did in 2017 is they raised the bar even more and said, we're going to play on a national a national level every year. And these Rose Bowls, these opportunities to play for national championships and be a part of this college football playoff discussion on an annual basis, that's where we live now. And it's similar in the fact that you're raising the bar of the program and you want to continue to see it build.
You know, we've said on Dog Nation Daily a lot this week that there are 3 words this week that matter more than any other. It's own the East, something that Georgia has a chance to do on Saturday. And the right to even dream that big was made possible in part by what John and his team did back in 2002, laying a foundation that Georgia's still enjoying and Georgia's still reaping the benefits from. And on Saturday, it's another chance to take another step towards a big goal here in 2018. It's been great to talk to you about that here tonight at our Dog Nation Marlows Big Game Preview live from the Marlows in Brookhaven. John, I appreciate you being a part of it. So much fun to hear your stories and hang out and talk a little Georgia football. Of course, we got plenty more Georgia football talk coming up tomorrow at 10 a.m. on Dog Nation Daily. Hope to see you there for that. Appreciate you watching here tonight for this. And for the folks here on hand at the Marlows in Brookhaven, thank you so much for coming out and making this such a fun event for us each and every time. We'll look forward to being back in the Marlows again very soon. And if you need to check out the Marlows in your neighborhood for some of that great chef-inspired food, craft cocktails, and some special beer selections, what a great way to enjoy a fall evening right here on a patio just like this one. The Marlows closest to you is certainly always an outstanding choice. Everybody have a great night. Thanks for being with us here for our Marlows Big Game Preview. We'll look forward to seeing you again next time.